I wanted really people to feel is to go into these happy moments that we captured. Look at those scenes, look at those people. Sometimes you feel like people are in your face, literally, and then feel the happy moments, but then think, oh my God, this doesn't exist anymore. And I am responsible. My money paid for that. I have to do something that my money is not employed and weaponized to kill all these people and destroy these beautiful places. You're asking me this question in a very distressful moment of my life, probably the most depressing moment of my life. Because I look at Trump visiting those rich Arab Gulf nations, enjoying their riches, and the minimal thing they could have done is to stop the genocide before receiving him. He said, I even have a master's degree, and it was hard for me to understand the roots still until I studied the events of 1948. It all clicked in because, so it was a series of like a systematic, ethnic expulsion of one nation to make room for another nation. For Palestinians, we take this for granted. We think, you have to understand how unfair it is. And then he explained to me that, no, you are not actually doing enough to explain that process to an American audience.
This year marks 77 years since the Nakba, when over 750,000 Palestinians were violently expelled to make way for the State of Israel. That catastrophe never ended. It continues today through siege, apartheid, and mass displacement. Today, we speak with Dr. Ahlam Muhtaseb, whose work as a filmmaker and scholar preserves these truths. Dr. Muhtaseb is a Palestinian scholar, filmmaker, and educator whose work centers on media, memory, and liberation. She is the Ida B. Wells Senior Data Justice Fellow at Princeton University. She is co-director of the acclaimed documentary 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, and the creation of Phoenix of Gaza, XR, an immersive virtual reality experience that documents the lives and resilience of Gaza's people. Her storytelling spans traditional and emerging media, always with a focus on truth-telling and resistance. We're honored to welcome her to the show. Welcome, Dr. Muhtaseb, to the American Muslim Dialogue podcast.
Thank you so much, Sister Sabiha. Thank you for inviting me.
So I first wanted to talk about your work. It carries both the weight of history and your own personal truth. And it feels important to begin with your own lived experience. Where did you grow up and what was it like living under occupation?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me again. And I would like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting here on indigenous, colonized, and ceded lands. And just to acknowledge the exploited labor of enslaved people in this country and also immigrants, past and present. I grew up in the city of Al Khalil. I was born in Al Khalil and grew up in Al Khalil or Hebron. And I lived there until I was 27 years old before I came to the United States on a Fulbright scholarship. And the way I actually introduce myself usually in Arabic is Ana bint al-Intifada. I'm the daughter of the Intifada, the first Intifada or uprising, which was an uprising that started in 1988 all the way to just before the signing of the Oslo peace agreements in 1994. And I grew up under brutal Israeli military occupation of the West Bank at that time. The West Bank and Gaza, of course, after 1967. And my father was a political prisoner. He was in and out of prison. Actually, when I was a baby, he was in prison the first time. And then when I was a kid, more than once. I just actually wrote a book that will be released very soon on my experience visiting my father in prison and the violence that comes with that experience that people usually don't even think about, because we usually think about the violence of imprisonment, which is, of course, the main and most important aspect of that experience, or the other types of violence. But there are a lot of embedded violence in our lives in Palestine under Israeli occupation and colonization. So this had, like really impacted my experience and the person I am today, living through the, as I said, first, the brutal first years of the Israeli occupation, and then the Palestinian Intifada or uprising, being shot at age 16 in my arm, actually, while in a demonstration on Working Women's International Day in 1989.
Mhm.
So, of course, it molded me, the person I am. It impacted the fact that in whatever I do, as you said, I seek, justice and liberation for the Palestinian people. And then I came to the United States on a Fulbright scholarship. My intention actually was to stay for only 1 year, but then I met my husband and
Mhm.
we got married and I stayed and I did my PhD and continued here.
I watched one of your TED Talks and you mentioned the movie Indiana Jones in the context of your own realization about colonial narratives. So, can you share more about your own personal awakening
Mhm,
and
mhm.
how that journey shapes your work today?
It's I just want to first start by saying it never happens out of a sudden. Like you wake up and say, "I'm going to be a decolonial scholar," and I change. It was, as you said, a journey. It was unfolding through a lot of experiences, and one of them is the media experience. But it's not the only one. It's also being visibly Muslim. Though I'm white passing, I am my name and my identity and
Your
the way I
hijab.
carry myself, and of course, being
Yeah.
visibly Muslim with a hijab,
Mhm.
that also had a huge impact. Those experiences had a huge impact on my path, actually, towards a very different research and scholarly and even intellectual journey and approach.
Mhm.
And of course, being a scholar of media studies and looking closely, not only as a viewer, not only as a consumer of media, because of course that's important also, but also as someone who analyzes media, who critiques media. And then you reach a point where you say, well, I'm sick of doing this. I'm sick of just critiquing, reacting, receiving, and I want to take a more proactive role. What can I do actually in terms of changing that narrative? And I think that's the slow realization of consuming media, both as an individual, a Muslim, of course, Arab, Palestinian individual.
Mhm.
I check all the marks in terms of, you know, the different classes of oppression and
Mhm.
marginalization. And then, it was also a good historical moment where we had, all the technological innovations that would enable someone without access to mainstream media to be able to have their voice. And it wasn't like what we have today. What we have today, like your podcast, for example, is facilitated by way more innovations that exist today than it existed when I started my journey, first as a grad student in 2003, and then as a junior scholar in 2005, and then taking on the journey in 2006 and starting, working on the documentary.
And much of what we see today is still very much shaped by dominant Western media narratives. Even when we try to fight back, we're just often reacting to their own
Mhm, mhm,
messaging. But your work shows us another path that
mhm.
we don't have to just react. We can produce our own media, like
Yeah.
you just mentioned, and it rooted in our own values and our own
Mhm,
truths. Um, so, how important is it for Palestinian and other oppressed communities to move from reacting to the dominant narrative to creating our own content,
mhm.
our own tools of storytelling?
Yeah. I have to say that I am highly impressed with young
Mhm.
generations. I tell students now, you are my teachers, I'm not your teacher. After the encampments,
Mhm.
and all the digital and physical activism, especially of students in the United States, in the belly of the beast, I think we are actually getting a sense of how to do that. And
Mhm.
younger generations are so naturally and organically equipped actually to do the work.
Mhm.
And I see them do it every day in and out, being so innovative and creative. So when there is this huge attack on students' encampments and this criminalization of, constitutionally protected rights of demonstrating and doing an encampment and all of these avenues of activism, Now they resorted to a new form of activism and, pushing the narrative forward, which is fasting or hunger strikes.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have a movement on many, many campuses across the United States. I'm so proud that to a great extent it started with the CSU system where I teach. I teach at Cal State San Bernardino, but now it's spreading everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
An amazing, form of I'm still gonna fight this on our campuses, and I'm still gonna reclaim the narrative, and I'm still gonna push the actual narrative about what is happening in Gaza, a total genocide that the world is watching,
Mm-hmm.
enabling, funding, um, and they find those, pockets of resistance wherever they can. We have new forms of I think maybe we should think differently about technology,
Mm-hmm.
but young people have been, and this was one way we did with the team of the Phoenix of Gaza to actually be proactive and use very cutting edge technology that is not even known to many, many people, which is, extended reality technologies or immersive technologies when we started our work in Gaza. I say technologies are invented usually for the benefit of the elites, the benefit of, the powerful and dominant hegemonic groups in society, but we can, reclaim them, we can retool them, we can domesticate them. I don't know what other
Mm-hmm.
words I could use, but use them for the benefit of our community and to tell our own stories.
And I wanted to get into that very important project. But before I do, I also wanted to get a sense of what you think as far as the activism that we're seeing from everyday people, whether it's retweeting, resharing,
Mhm.
taking part in this digital resistance. They're sharing raw footage, and that's how we know what's happening. How do you see the role of everyday people as part of the broader ecosystem of digital activism? Is this type of decentralized storytelling something that will actually move the needle, in your opinion?
I think to a great extent it already succeeded. If we were able to shift the narrative in the United States, where you have a majority of Americans now empathize with Palestinians, where there is a majority of Democrats actually from all ages. It's no longer younger Democrats. The majority of Democrats are against giving more money and aid and weapons to Israel to continue killing Palestinians. Then, in terms of storytelling and narrative, I think we succeeded to a great extent, and we should keep pushing and continuing. I think what we have not succeeded in is translating this success in terms of storytelling and narrative into political clout
Mm-hmm.
enough to push change in policy. That's what we have not
Mm-hmm.
succeeded in yet. I see we are forging some changes.
Mm-hmm.
We are having this rift now a little bit in Congress, where in the past, you won't have even one person in Congress who would go against the lobby, maybe one or two, and then they get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have a minority that is growing. So I think that's where we should push for. It's not enough only to focus on storytelling and narrative building. We have to be more involved to build more political clout and power, and to have more representation in the political arena,
Mm-hmm.
to actually sponsor and support those voices who stand on the side of justice for all, including Palestinians, including Muslims and Arabs,
Mm-hmm.
in Congress and beyond,
Mm-hmm.
including, of course, even local political arena. Honestly, this is what I have been talking about recently. I got to an extent like, how much can you hide a genocide?
Mm-hmm.
How much can you hide a genocide, right?
Mm-hmm.
They could not hide the genocide. People in Gaza wake every day, like today, another bloody, devastating day in Gaza. They put their pain on full display for the whole world to see, hoping, still hoping until today, that maybe something will happen and change their fate. Maybe there is a divine intervention where, our politicians have some decency
Mm-hmm.
to see that we are operating this genocide. We are fueling it. We are operating that genocide. We are not only complicit, we are the doers of genocide. And you have a plethora, abundance of televised pain in Gaza. And in spite of that, we don't see any real change in the political arena in this country where we need it. We need it in this country more than any other countries because, and honestly, without our tax money, without our support in this country, Israel would stop tomorrow its genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. It would be forced to sit at the negotiation table and have a serious conversation over ceasefire and ending the genocide.
As you said, we need to become more advocacy work, more be involved in our organizations and try to have elected officials basically do the things that need to be done to end the genocide. Let's turn to your most recent project, Phoenix of Gaza XR. It's a very innovative form of storytelling. Can you walk us through about the project, its origins, intentions, and how it evolved?
So it started with my work with the X-Ray Lab, which stands for Extended Reality Lab at Cal State San Bernardino, where I teach. I was a faculty fellow. And I became a faculty fellow because, again, it's the similar mindset that I had when I started working on my documentary, 1948 Creation and Catastrophe. It's like I want to see what affordances this new technology, immersive technologies have, and how can we employ it in service of our community. It was a very similar, mindset. So I was a faculty fellow with the Extended Reality Lab. And the first thing we were all actually experimenting with technology, trying to see how we can use it, what technologies exist, what appeals to us, And I started seeing an opportunity to introduce life in a refugee camp to my students through immersive technologies. This is the beginning. I thought, okay, I did a lot of filming in Lebanon, for example, and I experienced firsthand what it means to be a refugee and how horrifying their conditions still are since 1948. And even worse because they have to build now on top of each other and, like in very unsafe building zones, etc. So I was introduced to 360 cameras, and that intrigued me. And I was working with one of my colleagues, James Trotter. One day I saw a couple from the Shatila refugee camp in Beirut. They put their engagement pictures on Facebook, talking about the power of storytelling. And they were like beautiful couple, like very dressed, she was dressed in this beautiful dress and makeup. She is also visibly Muslim. She has a hijab. And he's a young man in a nice suit. And it's engagement pictures, like very beautiful. But it was all with the backdrop of the Shatila refugee camp, which is horrifying. I mean, one picture shows those interconnected electric wires. It's like a mess of electric wires, very scary looking, actually. One was with a bombed car and one with a bombed building. So one of them was in these very narrow alleys in the refugee camp. And I was like, wow, I was wowed by this juxtaposition of two realities, right? The reality on the ground of the refugee camp, but also the reality of this young couple trying to make a beautiful life out of that environment. And I thought that was very powerful. Why? Because I think for me as a Palestinian, and I'm sure especially, I'm not a refugee, but for a lot of refugees, when I talk to them, they hate the fact that they are always molded in the static, um, one-sided image of impoverishment, poverty, marginalization, etc. And they wanted a more nuanced image of themselves. And I thought, wow, that was the kind of representation. Yes, this exists. I am a refugee. This is what a refugee camp looks like. But I could challenge that. I could, do something out of it. And from that, I remember James texting me and saying, I saw you shared those pictures. I would love to recreate them in 360.
Mm.
And I said, you know what? Give me 2 days. I will find them. I will fish those two because I had a big network
Mhm.
of people I worked with when I filmed my documentary in Lebanon. Because mainly I filmed in Beirut in those refugee camps. So I knew a lot of people. By the
Mm.
time I finished the documentary, and I was able actually to reach out to my contacts, and they were able to get me in touch with them. And this is how we started documenting life in a refugee camp. We send them. It took a while to get a camera 360
Mhm.
to Lebanon, and then to do some training and then get them tripod, etc. And we told them, you present life in a refugee camp to an audience in the United States. You start that. You define it. You have the power and the freedom to introduce it the way they want. And they did a beautiful job with the first 5 minutes. I mean, they sent us a lot of reels and
Mhm.
images, and we did 5 minutes about, out of what they sent us. And it was similar, here's the refugee camp, but then here's my apartment. I live with 9 people in
Mm.
a small apartment, but I have my dog Lucho, and Samih, the young guy. He looks up and calls for his dog from, I think, the 5th floor or something, and the dog actually barks back at him. And it's this funny moment where he's showing the devastation in the refugee camp, but then those pockets of hope, those pockets of happiness, they show us their favorite restaurant, etc. Then I had my student from Gaza, Naim Abu Radi,
Mhm.
who I actually was his also mentor and his committee chair. So I invited him to apply for a fellowship that we offered at the X-ray lab for $3,000, I think. And I said, you need just a creative ideas, and then we have a lot of resources, at your pick and order, basically, to make your idea happen. So he became a student fellow with the lab, and I was his mentor in the lab.
Mhm.
And this is when we said, you know what, I haven't visited Gaza in 6 years. Because once you leave, if you are studying, it's hard to go back because you are afraid of
Yeah.
getting stuck in Gaza
Mhm.
and losing your opportunity to go. And he lost an opportunity actually he got a scholarship to the United States that he was never was able to get an interview with the embassy, and he lost it actually. So
Mhm.
he went through a long journey that, maybe for another
Mhm.
time we can talk about that journey. But he said, out of longing to the smells, sounds and feeling of living in Gaza, out of that longing came the idea of the Phoenix of Gaza. And he said, I just want to bring Gaza with its multiplicity to an audience in that can't visit Gaza, like me, or like just Americans who can go. And he wanted to focus on what we usually don't see in the news,
Mhm.
outside the death and destruction,
Mhm.
mundane life activities, happy moments, things like that nature. And it took us. So that was, my mission was to fulfill
Mhm.
this creative idea, with the help, of course, of the team of the X-ray lab. It took us 6 months to find someone and send them the camera because, Israel had a total, but at that time, blockade of Gaza. I think at that time it was 15 years when we started working on the project. And so they limit everything that goes in and out of Gaza. But eventually, it's a small camera. It's like smaller than a cell phone. We were able to get it with someone, sneak it with someone who just walked through the checkpoint and nobody asked him about it. And we filmed from July 2022 to July 2023, focusing
Wow.
on the beautiful places of Gaza, the beautiful faces of Gaza,
Before the current genocide.
before we finished filming literally 3 months before the genocide started.
Subhanallah.
Not it. It was the most surreal thing ever you can imagine.
Mm.
Never thought we were capturing the past. We've never thought we were capturing a genocide. We've never thought that all of this would be destroyed. I mean, we're talking about 92% of Gaza is totally destroyed now. All the monumental historical places we captured, like Al Amari Mosque, Ibn Uthman Mosque, the Orthodox St. Preferius Church in Gaza, one of the eldest in the world, Qasr al-Basha or Pasha Palace, Hammam al-Samra, it's like a Turkish bath, a very old one, like hundreds of years old. A lot of beautiful monuments, they don't exist in the geography of Gaza anymore. There is streets, beautiful streets by the beach. The beach refugee camp, we captured a great deal of it, and it was one of the very first places to be destroyed in this current genocide.
Mhm.
And so here where we started with a very specific mindset and goal of capturing Gaza outside of death and destruction. Literally, that was, like our line,
Mhm.
right? Into being forced very violently into death and destruction and genocide. This became a witness to the genocide, right?
Mhm.
A witness material to the genocide. This project became cultural preservation, historical memory. We
Mhm.
capture moments that would never be captured again.
Mhm.
And in 360, many people, have never, tried it. But once you put the headset on,
Mhm.
you feel you are immersed. That's why it's called immersive technology. You feel you are walking in Gaza that doesn't exist anymore.
Mhm.
You're walking the streets, you're looking at people that many probably of them are killed or maimed or injured
Mhm.
or imprisoned. But there was another goal that unfolded while we were filming, because we started building in virtual spaces, a kind of a museum. We started, like we were thinking, how can we deposit all the materials we're receiving? We're talking about hundreds of reels and images. So we thought, oh, we create something like a virtual museum, and we were copying some of the architecture we saw in the pictures, like Qasr al-Basha, beautiful, beautiful, place. And then it occurred to me, I said, how about if part of what we are doing is imagining a liberated Gaza? So that became an organic second goal of the project, to imagine a liberated Gaza in virtual spaces. And again, all of this was totally shattered with one of the most brutal genocides in modern history.
And before we actually started recording, you told me about the sad news about your photojournalist. Can you tell us about him?
Yes, our photojournalist Yahya Sbeh was killed on Wednesday, not this Wednesday, the Wednesday before, while only 5 hours after the birth of his baby daughter, Sana. And his last image on his Instagram was him holding his baby and doing the adhan in her ear. And he said, Nawartina ya Amirti. You brightened our world, my princess. Like welcome to the world or something like
May
this.
Allah have mercy on him.
I mean, and he just left the hospital and went with his friends. In our culture, there is something we call tihlaya. You give sweets or dessert for people, loved ones, when you have a birth of a son or a daughter.
Mhm.
And he was doing exactly that with his brother-in-law, who lost his wife, Yahya's sister, last year. She was killed last year with her daughter, Shuri.
Mm.
And several of his friends. One of them is his best friend, actually.
Mm.
And Israel decided to shell that um, restaurant. It's called the Thai restaurant, which was full of civilians. One of the very last places where you could get a meal in Gaza. And killed many, many civilians. In that day, they killed over 100 civilians. But in that specific location, over 23 were killed and many were injured.
Mhm.
And so it has been devastating for us. I mean, we agreed to do this interview for some time now, but I had to cancel. Actually, the same day I was supposed to fly to University of Iowa, because we were supposed to have the exhibition there, and I had a keynote, and I just couldn't. I canceled. I told them, I'm so sorry. There is no way for me to come and show up and talk,
Yeah.
even if I'm going to talk about Yahya and center his voice.
It's so fresh right
Yeah.
now.
And by the way, this is someone we kept his identity confidential for many, many months
mm,
and secret. We wouldn't say his name or put his picture on the website. And then we asked him in one of, we were talking to him and we asked him if he would, how does he feel about having his picture on the website, because we redesigned the website. And he said, I don't care, honestly. Like, you can share my picture and my name. I'm a war photojournalist. I'm known here. And in a way, the way he talked about it was like if it's gonna happen, you can't prevent it. He was almost predicting it.
mm,
And so we asked him to write, introduce himself, so we can put the introduction on a poster like we did with our former photojournalist Ahmad Hasaballah,
mm,
who lost his father and was evacuated out of Gaza. And he wrote beautiful words, very, very powerful and impactful. But the ending was that every time I think about it, it shatters me, because he said, today I report the news, tomorrow I'm going to be the news. And that was the last communication from Yahya to the team. He sent it to Dina, our, communication, expert, because she was designing his poster. And that the whole project is one of the most surreal experiences one can ever have.
mhm,
Every time you're trying to escape death and destruction, genocide, like to show something different, you are forced violently back into the spot you are trying to resist.
mm.
You're trying to resist those colonial impositions on you, you know,
And they remind you.
and have, reclaim your narrative and
Mm-hmm.
try to do something you want to do different, not what they want you to be, you know, uh, a prisoner of.
Right,
And then you are pushed violently back into the same spot.
right. I
And
mean,
so this is what we are living now,
but
really.
even the name Phoenix, right? It's something to be born out of the ashes, right?
Exactly.
So I can probably guess why you chose that name, but how did it reflect deeper? How did you choose that name to reflect the deeper
Yeah.
meaning coming out of it?
It was actually Naim who chose the name, because for him he wanted again to show the resilience,
Mm-hmm.
the resistance of people on the ground. They find ways to resist the impositions of a brutal blockade, where Israel allows only what keeps, at that time, we're not talking about the genocide, but people don't, everyone here in this country, you know, not everyone, but many people, or at least the mainstream media, try to always focus on October 7, as if life and death and everything started on October 7, not knowing that before October 7, if they looked on October 6 or October 5th or October 4th, there had already been a genocide, a slow genocide happening in all of Palestine, but especially in Gaza with the blockade, where they imposed a diet. They enforced a diet in the whole population of Gaza, where they allowed only, according to Israeli confessions, these are not our words, allowing only what keeps the population of Gaza alive, but not to thrive. And in spite of that, people in Gaza found so many different ways of thriving and resisting and to show resilience. And so Naeem's, as someone, who was born and grew up in Gaza, wanted to show
Mm-hmm.
that aspect of Gaza, the resilience, the resistance, with everyday life aspects. So he came up with the Phoenix of Gaza and say how we keep on rising out of ashes. I want to think still, that I still want to have hope. It's very, very hard, especially nowadays. I mean, we are doing this during some of the most atrocious days in Gaza, not only because of the killing, the daily killing.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen similar daily killing before, even more. But this is combined with starvation for over, now we are 2.5 months, into a starvation campaign in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
where there is no, can you imagine living in total darkness, no electricity, no internet, no food, no water? They even destroyed the last salination,
Plant.
station or plant in Gaza. How is this okay? They every day they shell hospitals rebuild, people are persevering, they are resisting, rebuild, and then they shell the hospitals again and again and again. All they have to do is they throw the word Hamas, a construct they created in this country, where all you have to do is just mention the word Hamas and then our brains stop functioning. There is no logical analysis of the fact that they never produced a shred of evidence to support their claims about the hospitals, for example. International doctors, physicians have been giving their testimonies over and over, stating we've never seen even one armed person inside the vicinity of the hospital or even around it. I've been to actually several events where they had those doctors who come back from Gaza, American doctors. And this question always comes up. And they always say the same thing. And Israel didn't bother to produce any evidence because they know they could get away with it. And again, we allow that. And people could, say, well, it's not my responsibility, it's my government. I'm sorry. You elect the government in this country, If you claim democracy, then it's your responsibility.
So do you, because of all this, transgressions and war crimes, so this project, Gaza XR, may not just be for educational, it actually can be evidentiary. Have you been approached by anyone to use this material in legal efforts to prosecute war criminals?
Yes, one of the very first organizations to approach us was Amnesty International. So Amnesty International actually thought this was an important wealth of information, especially when they are investigating claims of Hamas being in buildings, for example, Al-Amari Mosque. Why would you totally destroy an ancient mosque, a cultural heritage like Al-Amari Mosque? They can actually now, with VR, go inside totally and see if there is a tunnel opening or something like that. So they thought it was actually very precious type of evidence that they could use. We tried to reach out to ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and the International Criminal Court, ICC, but it was very hard. It is still very hard to reach them. I talked to many in the community that I thought maybe they could have leads to them. And my understanding also is that they have a very strict way of collecting data and evidence. It's not just random accepting from anyone. So they have a very specific approach. Still, I want it to be known for anyone who's connected to them that we have this material and they are welcome to use it actually.
And the project itself is basically somebody wears one of the VR headsets or it's in a 360 theater, correct?
Yeah.
And you walk through the streets of Gaza, the bustling marketplaces, the mosques, the churches, the schools. But there's an emotional dimension to it as well as a political purpose. What was your intention? What did you want people walking away from it to feel? Not just to see and enjoy, oh, this is nice, but what action or what hope did you have from that project when people walk away experiencing those scenes?
Yeah, well, of course, that's what used to be is different from what is now. And it took us 3 months to shake ourselves up and out of our depression because especially the first couple of months of the genocide were so hard because we did a lot of filming in northern Gaza and this is where they hit hard. And so Naim would reach out every day and say, oh my God, doctor, do you remember Hammam Samra? It's gone, totally destroyed. Orthodox Church, gone. Amari Mosque. And so he was reporting every day the destruction and disbelief. And at at the beginning, we were hoping that it would at one point end. Nobody had ever imagined that it would, continue for over 2 years, well, close to 2 years now. And then we realized that it's actually gonna probably stay for way longer than we thought. And then it was James who told us, you have to show people what is happening. Like, this is powerful demonstration of the genocide happening when people visit something that doesn't exist anymore, or see people who probably were killed. At that point, people were talking about a lot of research. If, as a scholar, of course, I always look at research, and a lot of research unfortunately focuses on the impact of empathy, which is something that rubs me the wrong way very much, because seriously, is that what we are looking now? Empathy? For you don't need this to build empathy. What I wanted really people to feel is to go into these happy moments that we captured. Look at those scenes, look at those people. Sometimes you feel like people are in your face, literally. Um, and then feel the happy moments, but then think, oh my God, this doesn't exist anymore. And I am responsible. My money paid for that. I have to do something, that my money is not employed and weaponized to kill all these people and destroy these beautiful places. And the images are so beautiful. Like, you look at strawberry picking and strawberry field, beautiful, beautiful images. People actually going up the tree to pick dates with the camera with them. And our photographer, at the beginning, we struggled with him because he's a war photographer, right? He's like, you want me to capture people knitting? Students, like kids playing, universities. Like, he was shocked because he was expecting us to send this camera and say, go and follow, the shelling and the bombing. And we were saying, no, go and find happy moments. Horseback riding, thriving horseback riding in Gaza. You'd never think of. I was shocked when I saw that. I was like, oh my God, they have those beautiful, like arenas for horseback riding. The gold market was shocking to me. Like, they have this beautiful gold market in a very ancient souk, right? So you go and you feel all these amazing, beautiful moments, and then boom, you remember. Now, we did manipulate some of those videos. We edited them in a way that reminds people that those don't exist anymore. For example, I think one of the most impactful videos was of Ahmad. He was, sorry, Muhammad. Muhammad was a 12 years old kid in Mukhayyam al-Shati or the beach camp. One of the very first to be destroyed in North Gaza, because actually the Israelis this time, they came in from the sea when they started their invasion of Gaza. And the Ahmed Hasaballah, our former photojournalist, he gave Muhammad the camera and said, just skateboard. He was skateboarding. Just take it with you and keep skateboarding. He's on rollerblades, actually. And so you feel it's amazing, experience, because he's holding the camera. So you feel like Muhammad is holding you. You can look around, because this is immersive technologies. You can look around and see everything around you. And so you could look around and literally see him over your shoulder, his face over your shoulder. You feel this intimacy. And then we dim the natural voices you hear when he's going around the refugee camp. And then he goes actually into the beach street where you see the sea on his right hand, I think, side. And then you start hearing bombs, screams, shells, and those are true voices from Gaza, from the same location, because there was a guy who captured voices of Gaza and just uploaded those as audio files, open access. And so we use some of these, and he labels them. We use some of these to actually, in the editing process, where you start seeing people really screaming and shelling, and the whole scene. You are still in Muhammad's hand, but you don't hear the actual voices around him. And that was just to remind people that what you see is totally destroyed.
Mm.
Almost everything was totally destroyed. And we don't know if Muhammad is alive or not. We didn't capture his last name, unfortunately.
Mm.
We can't even ask if he was still alive or not.
And you had mentioned before about the 1948 Creation and Catastrophe, your documentary. So I want to take us back to that a little bit. It's a film that not only recounts what happened, but reshapes our public understanding.
Mhm.
A lot of mainstream conversations just want to draw the line at 1967, and as if 1948 were somehow a settled
Mhm,
history.
mhm,
What
mhm,
happened? People lost, people won, and now we have a state
mhm,
called
mhm,
Israel. But your film insists on going back to the root.
mhm.
So, why was it important for you to center 1948 as the foundation of what we're seeing today in Gaza?
Yeah. To be honest, when I first started the project, I wanted, with very minimal training, as a as a filmmaker, and with some basic technologies at that time, like it wasn't even a high definition camera in 2006, to go and capture life in diaspora of Palestinian refugees, and to do like a small scale, short documentary for classroom use. But it was my partner that I partnered with later, Andy Trimlett, who convinced me to change the focus, and to focus on 1948. And Andy is just an average white American man who has no connection whatsoever to any of our issues, especially Palestine. But he had a master's degree in Middle Eastern studies. And when he approached me, when he knew that my work in 2006 was interrupted by Israel's invasion of Lebanon.
Hmm.
And I was forced to actually leave, and I couldn't continue. So in 2008, I wanted to go back and continue my work. And this is when Andy came into the picture, and he said, "I heard you're going back." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I've always had this idea, and maybe we can partner. I want to focus on 1948." He gave a very compelling argument. He said, as an average American who doesn't know or knows little, representing most Americans probably, it's very hard to understand until you understand the events of 1948. He said, I even have a master's degree, and it was hard for me to understand the roots still until I studied the events of 1948. It all clicked in because, so it was a series of like a systematic, ethnic expulsion of one nation to make room for another nation. For Palestinians, we take this for granted. We think, you have to understand how unfair it is. And then he explained to me that no, you are not actually doing enough to explain that process to an American audience. And so this is how we started working. Actually, it was from the perspective of an American person who didn't understand until he studied those events. So this is how we started. And of course, for me, I don't believe in defining the conflict as occupation of 1967, as you said.
Mhm.
So it was natural for me, of course, to accept and embrace that vision as a Palestinian, because for me, it's the very violent process of always forcing us to love our colonizers
Mhm.
and to talk about hate when we were the victims of atrocious genocide that kept on unfolding for 77 years. It never stopped. There were so many episodes of the genocide since 19 and even before 1948. Actually, the colonization of Palestine, and I'm talking about the Israeli colonization or the Zionist colonization of Palestine, not the British one, started way before 1948. It started actually with labor.
Mhm.
It started with taking the land and kicking out Palestinian and Arab labor out of it. But anyway, without distracting, I'm going to go back to your question and say that, yes, it was very important that we show the root cause of the so-called conflict. It's not even a conflict, but at least to make it.
And you just mentioned about, you're asked to thank your colonizers. And
Mhm.
what I found fascinating about your documentary was that you have actual interviews of the Zionist soldiers from Haganah who
Hmm.
did the actual terrorizing and displacement and genocide. Um, I was always curious, how were you able to get them on camera to admit their own atrocities?
So from day one, we decided after Andy and I agreed to start the film that he would do those interviews because I can't have access to the interviewees for two reasons. The first one is an actual physical limitation as a Palestinian who carries the West Bank ID. So, by Israeli law, I am not allowed to cross the imaginary borderline.
Which is undefined today. Yeah.
Yes, tonight, yeah, it keeps on changing, right? It's very fluid. To cross to so called 1948 areas where Israel established its state.
Mm.
That's the first barrier. But the other one is a psychological one because, of course, they are not going to sit with a Palestinian, especially a visible, a visibly Muslim woman with a hijab, knowing I'm Palestinian. I mean, it's even if I was a white passing, it's very hard not to know my identity. I speak some Hebrew, but they would immediately catch I'm Palestinian and my name and all of that. So they wouldn't say, sit down and admit what they admitted to Andy.
Mhm.
So we use the fact that Andy is an average Californian, white guy, and he, when I asked him about his approach, he said I mainly listened without showing any judgmental reactions or facial expressions or anything. I just let them talk, and that encouraged them to talk more. The way we were able to get a list, I think, was very challenging. So, because Israelis don't like to talk about this.
Mm.
So, you are right. I mean, how it was almost impossible. So, what we did is we partnered with a very radical Israeli anti Zionist group, a small fringe. They almost don't exist in Israeli society, but there is a very small fringe group called Zokhrot or Dhakirat in Arabic. And it actually has Palestinians and Israelis, but the Israelis are very anti Zionist, very radical, and they call for the decolonization of the Israeli mind, especially on 1948. So when we approached them, we were like very excited, like they wanted such a project.
Mm.
And they played an instrumental role in giving us access to many things, including the archives, Israeli archives,
Mm.
because like simply we don't have that access. They prepared a list of Israelis who actually participated in 1948 and 1947 or before, and after. Andy booked his ticket and was about to leave to Palestine. Then they called him and they said, probably you should cancel your trip. And he said, why? He said, they told him, we started connecting the people to start lining up the interviews for you upon your arrival, and no one wants to talk.
Mm.
They all refused to do an interview. And he said, well, I'm not going to cancel it. I also have a lineup of interviews with Palestinians and I want to film the villages, the destroyed villages. So he had, a whole plan, of course. And he said, if it works with Israeli interviewees, it works. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. And he left and they kept on trying and trying until they found really a very small group among the big list. It was only a small group of Israelis who agreed to sit for an interview, unlike Palestinians. Palestinians wanted to talk, except for one person I approached. Every one of them wanted to talk and tell their stories
Mhm.
because it's victimhood stories. It's not like this is what I did and I'm not ashamed of it because I needed a country no matter what.
Mhm.
So eventually, they were able to line up a limited number of interviews and they were loaded really with material that we could use. We were shocked.
Mm.
When I started listening, I was shocked, like, wow.
Really? So where does all of that, you must have troves and troves of documents and film. Where does that all of that live? And I'm sure it was very important for you to keep the accuracy of it. So
Of
how were
course.
you able to source these archival footage? You mentioned the Israeli archives, um, and keep the evidence for the film. And because you will be questioned if it's not accurate,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
whole film
Exactly.
discredited
Exactly.
for one mistake even.
Exactly. So I'll answer the first question and then I'll come to the accuracy one. So we have a big Google Drive, a huge one, where we organized all of our materials based on, like we have a subfolder for interviews, a subfolder, not the actual interviews, the actual interviews because they are too big. And we literally have over 100 of those, by the way. You see only 33 in the documentary, but we captured over 100 interviews with Palestinians, Israelis, and historians. Um, so the actual interviews, the video interviews, are on hard drives, several of those, and kept in several places, of course, because it's an important treasure, basically. Especially that most of them had passed away. And of course, then the rest, like the images, the archival videos, etc. These are all on our Google Drive and also on backed up on several hard drives. So they are kept safe, hopefully. And the other question is the historical accuracy. So that's a great question because it impacted our approach to the filmmaking process. Because at the beginning, we wanted to be more artistic, honestly. Like, okay, we do flashbacks, we focus on certain, personalities. It's, like you do in a documentary. And we checked that, like we tested it on, I started with my students and colleagues. And it was very confusing. It was too complicated for them to follow the timeline, and they found it very hard to distinguish between Palestinians and Israelis even. So we said, okay, you know what? We are gonna sacrifice the artistic approach and use a chronological narrative, right? And focus only. And so we decided it's gonna be just an educational film or documentary, and focus on the educational market for the documentary, which was actually a smart thing. And I could talk about this in a minute because we don't have access to mainstream media.
Right.
So it was the smartest decision we made, is to say, okay, let's focus on the scholarly integrity of the film and use a chronological approach, not necessarily the most artistic way. And it worked very well. And so our the historical accuracy became our prime factor, deciding factor in anything we include or don't include. And it was an atrocious, process. I mean, the film took us 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And we both work full time because we have to put food on the table, of course, different jobs. And we couldn't get funding for the film. It was really done with miraculously, with a very small budget.
And yet, I think on YouTube, you probably uploaded it 2 years ago. It has 500,000 views.
Yeah, for free. After October 7, we don't make any money out of the film, by the way. I mean, the film doesn't make a lot of money to start with as a historical documentary, but even the money it generates, it's mainly for our distributors and to just maintain the work for the film and taxes and stuff. Like our LLC has always functioned like a nonprofit. So we don't monetize. So we didn't care. Like once after October 7th, we realized that we don't have contractual obligations to our distributors. We approached them and said, that's it. We're releasing it for free on YouTube. We didn't even have advertisements, enabled because we don't want people to be watching Genocide and then, boop, an advertisement pops up. But to go back to that question, it was very crucial. So we had to, we didn't only look in Israeli archives. That was part of it. We looked in the New York Times archives. We looked at the British Pathy, British Museum, the United Nations, of course, was a very important source of information. Everywhere we could find, archival images or videos or just, articles covering that period, we went for it. We even hired someone to go to New York to dig in the microfilm and microfiche of one of New York's public libraries for a newspaper that doesn't exist anymore, but it covered hugely, the events. it was a newspaper, an old newspaper that actually stopped publication, or ceased publication only a few years after 1948. Can't remember how long they stayed in business. And we sent someone to England. Actually, a graduate student was studying there, Palestinian American, who went to the British Museum and got us two very rare documents about Israeli military orders. So everywhere we could find, archives, we tried to get it with the, as I said, limited resources we had. Of course, Getty Images, we had to pay a fortune for that. We couldn't use everything we wanted to use because they were expensive, but we tried to strategize, and we did some fundraisers, successful ones actually, where over 500 donors helped us get it to the finish line. That's why this is a community project. We don't monetize because we feel like, well, a lot of people invested in this project and it's not fair. And let me tell you a quick story. I know we are probably at the end of our time, but about the historical accuracy and how that manifests in real life in the decision-making process. So up until 2014, and remember I started in 2006, but I started working with Andy in 2008. So up until 2014, we did not have any survivors from Deir Yassin, one of the most atrocious, massacres, and one of the most instrumental in the genocide, not because of how it was like the worst massacre. It was not. There were worse massacres like Tantura, for example. But the way it was weaponized and employed by the Zionists to scare off Palestinians, and how it facilitated the ethnic expulsion of Palestinians, the way they employed it to instill fear, like tremendous fear in Palestinians, and make them sometimes even run away. And so although this was a very important, episode to focus on, we didn't have any survivors, Palestinian survivors, nor did we have any Israelis who admitted at least to participating in Deir Yassin. No one said I participate. So we thought, okay, we are just going to mention Deir Yassin, do like a voiceover and use some archival images and videos and call it a day, basically, up until 2014. So we already had started, editing and started the production process, post-production process. And Andy told me, that's it. We're not going back. We have to finish this film. Like, it's taking too long. At that time, we're talking about 6 years. And for me, for 8 years, if we, consider the work I've done before. And he said, like, he was like adamant about trying to finish it. Of course, we couldn't finish it until 2017. But anyway, what happened is Israel invaded Gaza in 2014 in what we thought at that time was the most vicious and atrocious attack on Gaza, not knowing that we would be witnessing the genocide we are witnessing now. And so I was in demonstrations every week in LA, in San Diego, wherever there was a demonstration. I was on sabbatical, so I was like taking my son, who was only 3.5 years old, and just going in demonstrations. And there were the ones in San Diego were interesting because there was an old man who kept on like insisting on coming to every demonstration, like ailing. His health was ailing, obviously, like was very obvious. And he brought his wife with him, and his wife all didn't seem well. She looked ill. He would bring her a chair and seat her, in the demonstrations. And when we did the marches, he would wait until we come back. And I thought that was, and he was a sweet guy. He would bring like sweets for the kids. He would give my son like candy and stuff. So I thought I really have to talk to him after. So I approached him once, and I think it was the last demonstration when they announced the ceasefire. So I knew like probably I wouldn't see him again. I really have to talk to him. So I introduced myself and I asked him about his name, where he's from. He was like, I'm Palestinian. I said, where are you from in Palestine? That's Palestinians always ask that question. And when Palestinians answer, they don't answer, I am from San Diego, or I am from Lebanon, or they answer usually with the actual town or village they came from,
Keeping
at one
that
point.
connection.
Always. I did a lot of research on this. I did interviews with children in Al Yarmouk refugee camp in Syria that doesn't exist anymore. And every child, when I asked them the question, answered with the village where their family came from in 1948. None of them said, I'm from Al Yarmouk or I'm from Damascus.
Mm.
Every one of them knew, actually, they knew the village and the district, which was fascinating for me. I was like, you also, like they would say, I'm from Amqa, Yafa district, or something like this. And that was, Anyway, so he said from Deir Yassin.
Mm.
I was like, from Deir, like the Deir Yassin? And he said, yeah, there is only one Deir Yassin. And I said, I was dreading, but I asked the question, are you a Nakba survivor from, like, are you a survivor of the massacre of Deir Yassin? He said, yes. He was 7 years old, I think, or 8 years old. And I said, do you remember? He said, of course I remember. I have a lot of memories from that day.
Mm.
And I couldn't believe it. So I said immediately, knowing that Andy would kill me, but I had to ask the question. Like, we're doing this film. Would you sit for an interview? Oh, I asked him, where do you live? And he said, in San Diego. And I was like, oh my God, like he lives down the road from us. He said, yes, I would do an interview, but you know what? Probably you should talk to my brother. I said, your brother? He said, yes, he was 11 years old. He remembers way better than I do.
Mm.
And he wrote 3 books, and one of them was on the massacre, on Deir Yassin.
Mm.
And I was like, where does he live? He said, in Escondido. I was like, okay. I got the number and I told Andy, and I was like, I know you are gonna kill me. He said, no, of course, yeah, we have to do this. So we went to his house and we were there for 3 hours
Mm.
and did this massive interview. He was just a wealth of information about Deir Yassin. He had maps. He even drew some of the maps by hand.
Mm.
And so anyway, he gave us a lot of things. He gave us his book. It was in English and Arabic, I think, if I'm not mistaken. He gave us a lot of information. Did a very heart-wrenching, interview. I don't know if you remember that interview, and some of the
Mhm.
revelations were shocking, especially the bakery story.
Yeah.
So because it was such a controversial, actually, revelation of events,
Mhm.
it took us 8 months. It took us back 8 months in production, actually, to piece out
Rework it.
and a
Yeah.
whole segment, on Deir Yassin. So the first thing we needed was an Israeli person who would admit that they participated in 1948. We found 3 names. We went through them. First one had a stroke, couldn't speak anymore at that time.
Mm.
Second one said, I wrote a book, read it. And Andy actually read the book. I didn't read the book, but Andy did. But we needed an interview. The last one agreed to do an interview. And it was one from the Zohorot group who did the interview
Mhm.
for us and sent us, the recording. And it was, Mordechai Gahon
Mhm.
that you see, and he says, I want to clean up.
Mm.
He doesn't admit that he participated, but he admits that he was sent by the Haganah to clean up. And then he uses the word peaceful.
Mm.
And everything looked peaceful after we did the cleanup.
Mm.
But then we had to find other survivors to corroborate the interview and the facts in the interview. I actually went back and interviewed Uthman Aqil, the survivor, 2 more times over the phone.
Mm.
And what I did is I wanted to make sure that he really remembers well and there is consistency in the story. And the first time he went along and he just repeated, and it wasn't like the same extensive interviews, but there were some of the details that I wanted to make sure it was consistent. And in particular, the fact that he told us that they discovered them hiding in their house on the 3rd day. And he was the first one to ever mention a 3rd day. Most accounts say it was only 1 day.
Mm.
Some accounts say that there was still shooting the 2nd day, but no one ever said it was there was killings continued until the 3rd day. It was the first time we hear of it.
Mhm.
So we did a lot of digging, and then we wanted to make sure it was a plausible story. And guess what? It was.
Mhm.
Actually, it was. The majority of killing was the first day. But once they were in control of the village, they spent the second day actually cleaning, and kind of like making sure there are no remnants of
Rebellions. Yeah.
Palestinians, especially, resisting Palestinians. And their house was like a fortress, the way he described it. It was the mayor's, his father was the mayor.
Mm.
So it was the mayor's house. It was 3 stories, like stone building, huge one. And they couldn't actually, and his father and grandfather were sharpshooters.
Mm.
And his grandfather was in the Ottoman army, actually. And they kept on shooting back and protecting the house until the Zionists were able to get a mortar and shell the house.
Mm.
And that was the only way they could get into the house. And it was in the morning of the third day, and they killed his father. Actually, they wounded him seriously, and wounded his grandfather and many of his uncles. This is the reason why they were able to at last, get
Okay.
inside.
Yeah.
And they wanted to release the grandfather, but he insisted on staying with his wounded son, and then eventually they killed them all.
Mm.
They took all the men who didn't look children, you know, old enough, even if they were 16, 17, and lined them on a wall and shot them all in front of Uthman Aqil. So he had those incredible, like, devastating stories of witnessing death one after the other. And so we wanted to build a good timeline, accurate one, make sure there is no historical mistakes. We found actually books that didn't know existed, including the very first volume on Nakba, authored by a Palestinian scholar, Arif al-Arif.
Mm.
It's only in Arabic. It existed. Nobody knew about it, actually. Many people, only maybe some of the scholars. Like, I remember I talked to Rashid al-Khalidi, and he told me there wasn't a translation of the book. So this is on my bucket list, actually, the one
Mm.
they translated. 3 huge volumes, actually.
Mm.
Extensive, detailed account of 1948. Arif al-Arif was a statesman
Mm.
employed by Jordan.
Mm.
And so he went from one place to the other, to check on people, etc. So he had access to a lot of information, and he used to write his diaries.
Mm.
So that's why there is a wealth in actually his book. And I actually had to send my nephew on an expedition, like a treasure hunt to find it. And he found it in an old library in Jerusalem.
Mm.
So, like, I had to read the section on Der Yassin and translate it for Andy. We found a book by Professor Hatem Kanane that was also existed in Arabic. I had to translate the book. So we went through this rabbit hole of research until, it took us 8 months to construct those 4 or 4.5 minutes on
Mm.
Der Yassin. And this is just to show you how much we really cared about accuracy. Then we had actually a board of advisors and consultants who watched the film, not
Mm.
the final draft, but one of the, like, advanced cuts of the film, and to give us feedback.
Mhm. And I'm deeply grateful for your work because it forces us to remember what many want to forget. Is so. Is there any ayah or verse, surah, that kind of guides you in your work, that helps you as a source of strength with what's happening in Gaza, Palestine, and even in all oppressed peoples around the world?
You're asking me this question in a very distressful moment of my life, probably the most depressing moment of my life, because I look at Trump visiting those rich Arab Gulf nations, enjoying their riches, and the minimal thing they could have done is to stop the genocide before receiving him. No, what they did is to deceive us all and make it sound like, oh, there is a deal behind Israel's back. And then you see an intensifying of Israeli attacks during the visit. And I'm someone who's usually very hopeful. I always try to look at the silver lining. I always try to always look at the positive, you know, little things in every crisis, in every atrocity. But lately, it was very, very hard to maintain my optimism. And this is when you surrender to God, right?
Mhm.
And so my mindset with the ayah that I always repeat now is وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. At this point, I see like I'm going to continue working, inshallah, because I have no option. We all should continue the work. But we have to have faith only in Allah at this point. I
Mhm.
have no faith in any leader, in any. I'm losing faith in humanity itself. Although, a lot of people came through, and the majority of the world, average people, are for Palestinians and they stand with Palestine, but not the decision makers of this world, with few exceptions like South Africa, of course, and some of the global South countries. So I resort to Allah. وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ, meaning that they all could have their plans, but God will always have His plan, Almighty, and it's the best plan. He is the best planner,
Mm.
and that's what keeps me sane.
Dr. Muhtaseb, thank you for preserving the truth, imagining the future, and refusing to let the world look away. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for hosting me. I appreciate your work.
If you enjoyed the episode, please visit our Patreon page to support independent media that features timely discussions relevant to you and the American Muslim community. Also, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts. This helps our channel reach more viewers and bring you more quality content. Thank you, and may Allah reward you.